So for the final event, we have our final talk of the evening, and it falls to me to introduce my fine colleague, Mike Reiter. Now, Mike is unique amongst the faculty because he is also an alum. So you can either hear me speaking as an alum or he's speaking as a faculty member. So as best I can tell, Mike showed up here on campus in 1985 as a kid from Asheville, North Carolina, but he tells me he was really a refugee from Texas. He received a BS in mathematical sciences with highest distinction, and as we've heard, that was a computer science degree, as it's done Mike well with computer science. Mike then went on to earn an MS and PhD in computer science from that place in New York that also has the red robes, otherwise known as Cornell University. And Mike did not start out as an academic. Instead, he went the industrial research route, working at AT&T Labs and Bell Labs Lucent, where he eventually rose to the position of director of secure systems research. And then Mike eventually left industry and became a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. And in 2007, we were looking to try and grow the faculty, and we thought we would reach out and steal some folks. And Mike being an alum, we thought maybe we could convince him to come down here. And I distinctly remember when Mike was visiting, we were trying to convince him. I had lunch with Mike, and Mike showed up head to toe, pretty much, in Carolina blue. So I thought, Carnegie Mellon's not that bad of a school, but I thought, maybe we would have a chance. So we're delighted that Mike came and joined our faculty. So Mike is now the Lawrence M. Slifkin Distinguished Professor of Computer Science, and he leads a research group here in computer security. He's a fellow of the IEEE and the ACM, and an award-winning instructor here at UNC. So please welcome Mike to the podium.
So Kevin just reminded me with that lunch story that he asked me where I wanted to go because I had come back and I said, I want to go to the Rathskeller. And he said, are you serious? And I said, yeah. And so he made me swear I would never tell anybody that he took me to the Rathskeller. I think I just blew that, Kevin. I'm sorry. So, yeah. So thank you. It's a real privilege to be here, and I can't give you a retrospective like Steve and Fred can. In other words, I can't do it nearly as well as they can, so I'm not going to try. What I thought I would try to do is to use this opportunity to reflect on the last 50 years from our field's point of view and try to project out a little bit into the future for the next 50 as to some of the grand challenges that we might face, that we are facing. And so kind of sort of look backwards at something we've solved, look forward at something that's emerged and frankly I don't know what to do with it, and then something a little bit in between. And so with that, I want to start with the big success story, right? If you look back at the last 50 years and go, well, what has been our big successes, right? It's hard not to look at the internet and go, yeah, that's probably it. Now, this is a map of the internet in 1980. Of course, back then it was called the ARPANET. And it doesn't look particularly impressive, certainly by today's standards. There's, it's cross-country, and there's a number of sites and so forth. Fast forward 20 years, and you see something more like this. This was the best attempt of a colleague, Bill Cheswick, then at Bell Labs, to map the major internet service providers in 1999. Obviously, this is a good bit more complex, right, than we saw on the last slide. Of course, this is only accelerated in terms of the growth of this network, and it's transformed our lives in ways that it's jaw-dropping to consider, right, in terms of how quickly it's changed what we do and how broadly it's affected our daily lives. If you look at this, chart of the worldwide internet users, so those bars, the red bars, get calibrated along the left axis. That's the total number of users using the internet, and the blue line gets calibrated against the right axis. That's the line per 100 inhabitants on the planet that make use of the internet. One thing that got me tickled when I was looking at this and grabbing this off the internet was you'll notice that 2014 has an asterisk, and the asterisk says estimate, which I guess means all the others are exact counts. Okay, so, but you know, 2014's close enough, okay, to the right number. But the thing that shocked me about this when I looked at it, yeah, the numbers are staggering if you think about the number of people using the internet. But I was a little bit surprised that the blue line, in particular, 40 persons per 100 was only at 40. And this actually puts an asterisk, I think, on one of our, a remaining challenge for our field. To explain what's going on in that 40, if you look at the number of people who have access to the internet in the developed world versus in the developing world, you see a massive gap. And this is clearly one of the places where we haven't done a good enough job, right? We have to find a way to make this resource accessible to the global population. This, I think, is something that hopefully over the next 50 years we will close that gap. The lines suggest that we might. But it certainly is one asterisk on the story, of otherwise wildly successful story. The other thing I wanted to point out in terms of not just from a networking perspective, this is a huge success, but in terms of the content available, the democratization of so many kinds of activities, education and so forth, computation and storage, access through new devices like the iPhone and Android phones and so forth, is really transforming. It's life transforming. And one of the things that is almost unbelievable is that if you look a single decade ago, most of this picture doesn't exist, okay? The only two services on this slide that existed a decade ago, at least as public offerings as we know them now, is Wikipedia and Facebook. The rest of them have all come about within the last 10 years. And when you think about that and how quickly we're advancing in terms of these services and so forth, it's really quite unprecedented. Now, Kevin didn't mention this, but my main area of research is in security. And so as a security guy, I'm kind of used to being the buzzkill, okay, to give you a bunch of downers, okay? So I'm going to take a minute now to sort of migrate into one of the grand challenges, which unfortunately isn't going to hold a lot of good news for us. And that has to do with, along with all this innovation, has come an unfortunate side effect, okay? And this has to do with the hardware and software infrastructure on which we now all depend due to our obviously advancing so rapidly. This is a chart of the software vulnerabilities that have been identified and reported, in this case, to the National Vulnerability Database run by NIST. From 1988 through 2014. You might notice that it is slightly on an upward trajectory, right, and with some downward dips here and there. Part of this reflects the fact that over time we've gotten better at finding problems in the software we put out. Part of this, however, also reflects the tendency we have in the software industry to produce things in the interest of richer functionality and first to market, and not so much for software quality. And this has turned around to bite us in many, many ways, as it started to become evident, for example, well, started much earlier than this, but here are two dramatic examples. You might remember there used to be big internet worms. Back in 2001, 2003, the Sapphire Slammer worm, you might remember, scanned, in 2003, scanned 90% of the internet in under 10 minutes, affecting hosts like crazy along the way. And you might wonder where these things have gone. Hey, have we fixed it? Have we fixed the problems? The graph that I just showed you maybe suggests that we haven't. So what's going on? Well, we have made some progress, to be clear. So I want to take Microsoft as an example because they have forever been everyone's poster child of, we really don't like Windows because it's buggy and has too many flaws and so forth, and I'm not disagreeing with that at all. But that wasn't very nice to say. But to their credit, they have done tremendous things in the last 12 years or so. This is the sort of now famous memo that Bill Gates sent to the company in 2002, basically saying, look, we need to fix this security thing. And over time, right, what they did is they developed something they call the security development lifecycle, and it has really made a substantial difference in many ways. So one longitudinal study found a 94% decrease in the exploitable vulnerabilities between Office 2003 and Office 2010. A 30% decline in the exploitability of their product line across the board. And the exploitability of low complexity vulnerabilities has decreased year on year. So they've done some really nice things. And in general, right, in terms of low complexity vulnerabilities, we're making some progress. The trouble, however, is that the low complexity problems aren't where the real problems are. What's happening increasingly now is the attacks are becoming, well, much more sophisticated. And in particular, the actors in this space have become much more well-resourced. And what I mean by that is it used to be the case that in the early days of the internet, people would do hacking for fame, street cred, maybe some small-time money. Increasingly, this is the domain now of organized crime, nation states, and the like. And I don't want to over-dramatize it, but I'll say warfare, and I'm not. Well, here's an example. Okay, some of you might have heard of something called Stuxnet. What this was is a program launched now evidently by the U.S. to compromise the centrifuges that Iran was using to purify uranium in an effort to slow down the development of their nuclear program. This actually began under the Bush administration, but this is an article that I pulled out of the New York Times in 2012, basically showing how the Obama administration made the decision to sort of continue this activity. And it was very effective. It really slowed down, decalibrated thousands of centrifuges in Iran that caused them to slow down their production or purification of uranium. Of course, this led to an escalation of these kinds of activities, and payback was swift. This is an article that was talking about some payback attacks that Iran was launching against American oil, gas, and electricity companies. And the goal here was not espionage. The goal here was, well, sabotage, right? Good old payback. So this is to say that this is a matter now of almost warfare is not overstatement at all. The market for exploits has gone through the roof. It used to be the case that hackers like these guys, Luigi and Donato, they would identify a vulnerability and they would sell it back to the company. This article from 2013 documents Microsoft upping its price to $150,000 for these kinds of things. Why so high? Well, the reason is that they're competing now with Israel, Britain, Russia, India, Brazil, North Korea, Malaysia, Singapore. We're in the market. Everyone's in the market, okay, for these kinds of vulnerabilities, exploits, right, to go launching against one another. Kind of scary stuff. And then sort of some of this hit ahead, or came to a head, I should say, in February 2013 through the release of a report about something called APT1. That was an acronym for something called Advanced Persistent Threat 1, which was named as such by a company called Mandiant that released the report. And what they did is they had been tracking this group of cyber criminals over the course of 7 years or so. You can go download this report at this URL if you're interested. And it's a rather incredible story. They had been following this group of cyber attackers over the course of that time. Mandiant observed this group compromise 141 companies. They maintained access to the victim networks typically for longer than a year. In this one case, it was over 4.5 years. And they stole literally hundreds of terabytes of data, including from one poor organization, 6.5 terabytes of compressed data, right? The targets were all over the map. You will notice a spike in the US, right? They seem to be mostly interested in US companies. And after investigating this group for as long as they followed them, they made the conclusion that this was actually the Chinese military. Basically conducting large-scale espionage, presumably to take this data and stand up other companies to compete. with these existing companies. Now, let me be clear, I'm not pointing fingers here. Remember, Stuxnet was us, right? You know, we started some of this. And so all I'm pointing out is that this has become an incredibly well-resourced and huge challenge for, for industry, for government, across the board, okay? This has become a quite substantial challenge. They even narrowed the source of this activity down to a single building in Shanghai that, based on the size of the building, this group includes literally hundreds of thousands of people who are hired, presumably, to do this kind of activity. And this has led to calls for something that is now, I think, one of the big grand challenges for my subfield of computer science, which is coming up with what people have started to coin a science of security. This is an article from IEEE Computing Now that basically tries to describe the agenda here, right? They point out that current security practice conveys very much an ad hoc flavor. You find a bug, you patch it, you just repeat, you iterate that over and over. And what we really like to have is an underpinning science, a systematic body of knowledge that would inform the engineering of secure information systems, and this is the important part, that can resist also known but unanticipated attacks, okay? Now, there are a lot of challenges to develop a science like that, and in my subfield, we're struggling a lot with this, but this is something that is very important. It's kind of an ironic, maybe, story from your perspective, or depending on your perspective on the NSA. The NSA is actually funding a lot of work in this space because they have two roles. They have the role of conducting surveillance against others, and they have the role of supporting the security infrastructure on which them and the other government agencies rely. And so that corner of the NSA is putting a lot of money now into coming up with this science of security or helping it develop. Some of the things we probably need to understand are all the functionality of increasingly complex hardware and software. And I say all the functionality because I don't just mean the functionality that you plan to have there, right? The way that security works is that existing artifacts get used in unanticipated ways, and sometimes that extra functionality is what comes back to bite you. But you also need to understand human behavior. There's definitely a psychology element to this, in the sense that these attacks that, say, Mandiant documented, very much involve social engineering as well as technical exploitation. So getting employees within these companies to do things that, frankly, they should have known better, but they were done in such a clever way that they fooled people into taking steps that they shouldn't have. We also presumably need things to measure and things to observe, right? Any good science has measurements and observations, right? And therein lies another huge set of problems. If you think about measurements, right, here's an old joke that a colleague of mine, Bill Shirless, reminded me of just a couple of weeks ago. So let me ask you, if you invest $2 million in security for your enterprise, what do you get? Well, today's answer, the best answer we can give, is you get $2 million worth of security, right? Well, that doesn't tell you very much about how much more secure your enterprise is, right? You can have retrospective measures like, hey, we got broken into less last year, apparently. Maybe you haven't detected all the break-ins, though. Or maybe your adversaries actually found a nicer target somewhere else, but they'll come back around to you next year. Don't worry, okay? You really don't know what you get for your investment. And this is, in some sense, on the shoulders of the security community because we haven't been able to tell people how to measure it, right? You can only measure it after the fact and go, well, yes, we seem to do better this year, but what will happen next year, we don't know. So defining metrics of predicted value would be a great starting place for this. Another great example of where we run into troubles is in observations. And just to illustrate this, I'll leverage one of my own examples in our own research. You might think that observations are easy to get because of the prevalence of these breaches, but unfortunately, a lot of the sophisticated ones, though, never see the light of day. Either they're undetected or they're hidden because the risk to companies' reputations is very high. They don't want to disclose how their systems got broken into because consumers might lose confidence in them, for example. And as such, it's very hard to get observations about what really goes on the ground. To give you one very simple example of how valuable sometimes this can be, we had a very fantastic opportunity last year to be given access to a multinational enterprise where they allowed us to conduct a study of their 85,000 hosts and their 600,000 antivirus detections that arose during the 3 months that we were looking at their enterprise. And we tried to answer certain research questions about how this epidemic was sort of unfolding inside this large enterprise. How did malware get into the network? How did these malware encounters occur? Did user behavior affect them in some way? And can we predict where the next malware encounters are going to happen? And we were given, frankly, unprecedented access to data. We had access to the employee database. We had access to the VPN logs, the web proxy logs, the log into the computer logs. We had all kinds of stuff, right, that we could rifle through to study this. I won't bore you too much with the findings, as some of them are kind of interesting, right? So we were able to sort of show how malware infections differ across countries. It turns out that in most countries, the external drive is the main place that malware finds its way into your computer. It's not the internet, at least in this enterprise. A third of the web-based encounters originated from websites that were categorized as business websites, which was kind of interesting. Part of that had to do with the filtering posture of the organization, but I won't drag you into that. People taking their laptops out of the enterprise ended up getting them infected on the outside 3 times more often than if they had left them in the office. That has probably to do with how they use them at home versus how they use them in the office. Things like this, right? We also found that, for example, we had the lowest malware encounter rate among upper management, interestingly, and the highest among technical people, right? So we're apparently messing things up, right? But the point here is not, I didn't bring this up because I wanted to show you how interesting these results are. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because we were looking around at how to corroborate our findings. Frankly, there were very few opportunities to do so. If you think about this for a second, we've been living the malware epidemic for decades, okay? If you translate this to a medical disease, think of the global response to Ebola just recently as an example. Admittedly, right, in many ways that's more serious. People are dying, that kind of thing. But we've been suffering, hemorrhaging financially from this malware problem for decades, okay? Yet, the opportunities we had to even corroborate our findings to anything published about this was virtually zero. And you compare that to the number of, if this was a medical thing or a disease thing, we would have hundreds of groups and labs all over the world studying this right now, right? Not here, right? Not in the computer security domain. In fact, we compared it to, say, the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report. And there are frankly a handful of others, maybe 4 other reports we could compare to, comparing malware infection rates and very different methodologies. And again, the point I want to make is that after 30 years of malware, this is basically what's known. And, I mean, about enterprise encounters of this kind of this type. So it points to a bigger cultural problem underlying how we treat malware incidents, how we do observation in this field. Okay, it's a big obstacle for us. Okay, so I've been a Debbie Downer for long enough. I want to move on now to a more spirited, positive grand challenge. And to do so, I was looking around at what other sort of projections people have made. And I remembered this paper by Butler Lampson that he wrote a couple of years, well, actually about 4 years after he won the Turing Award. Very smart guy. And he called out in 2003 the grand challenge of getting computers to understand. He projected that the next big wave of computer applications was going to be something he called embodiment, which is unconstrained interactions with the physical world. Dealing with the physical world depends on lots of things, mechanical effectors, neural connections, radio, and so forth. But in particular, he said it forces us to deal with uncertainty in the computer, and that's still poorly understood. And he called out in this article 2 example grand challenges. I'm going to talk about one of them here tonight, which is zero traffic deaths. That's the grand challenge, okay? And he pointed out that this is almost purely a computer science problem. The sensors exist already that are better than our own sensors. The cars that we drive are largely computerized anyway. There's really no obstacle to making them more so. So the actuators are more mature than we can probably accomplish with our own hands and feet anyway, too. So really the problem is dealing with the uncertainty of what we encounter on the road, understanding it, deciding what to do fast enough, and making the right decision. Are we going to get to zero traffic deaths? Maybe zero's a hard number to reach, but that was the challenge he put before us. If you look at where we are, right, this is a snapshot of traffic death rates per 100,000 people in 2010. You see us in light green. There are several countries beating us here. Canada, Japan, Australia, most of Europe are in a better place than we are. We're also beating some other countries and so forth, but this isn't a national competition, right? He didn't say zero traffic deaths in the US. He said zero traffic deaths, full stop, period. So, right, we want to solve this problem in the large. And what's left in terms of how to do this. What I wanted to do, most of you may have seen this video, and my apologies if I'm going to be a little bit repetitive over the next 90 seconds, but I thought that I would play this for you. This is a video that Google produced about 11 months ago on its self-driving car. If you visit the Bay Area, you may have seen this thing driving around and wondered about it. But I'm just going to turn this over to the video for 90 seconds, and it will give you a sense about just how far we've come in this domain.
I'm Priscilla, one of the test drivers on the Google self-driving car project. Our team is responsible for keeping the cars and other people safe while on the road, and for providing feedback on how they perform in the real world. A big part of our job is to go out into the world and uncover all the potential scenarios that a car might encounter. Then we help the engineers teach the car how to best navigate each one. Here are some examples of situations that we regularly encounter on the streets of Mountain View, California. We've taught the vehicle to recognize and navigate through construction zones. Our sensors spot the orange signs and cones early to alert the car of the lane blockage ahead, and we can change lanes safely. You'll also notice the vehicle typically moves to keep a safe distance away from large obstacles, like this truck stopped on the side of the road. Now we're approaching a railroad crossing, which requires special care. Notice the red fence and railroad sign that appears to the computer as we approach the intersection. This means that we'll wait until the tracks are clear of other vehicles before proceeding. Our cars treat cyclists as a special category of moving object. Watch in this example, when the cyclist holds up his arm, our software detects the hand signal and predicts his movement into our lane. The car knows to continue yielding to the cyclist passing by, even when he changes his mind, multiple times. We still have more work to do, but it's fun to see how many situations we can now handle smoothly and naturally. See you on the road.
So I thought that, I love that video, but one of the things that I thought was also interesting was she said, well, we still have some more work to do. I'm going to be impressed when they can handle this. This is one of the most hilarious videos I think I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, I know, right? So I'm guessing these aren't Google self-driving cars making their way through the intersection here. So I want to play this long enough because you see the people moving on the right up through the traffic. In just a second, there's going to be the bravest, here he comes, the bravest individual you've ever met in your life. Just walk through that intersection. Anyway, yeah, so Priscilla, I'm going to be impressed when your self-driving car can handle that. Anyway, so in all seriousness, we've come a long way on this zero traffic deaths thing. In fact, if you look at the trajectory of traffic deaths, they've reduced by about a third in the last, I want to say, since about the time he wrote that article. So from about 15 per, I won't try to reconstruct the numbers, but they dropped by about a third during that time. Now, to get the rest of the way, though, there seem to be some big challenges left. And I'm now somewhat I'm going to do my best to represent some of my colleagues in other fields here. So folks, if I get this wrong and I don't do it well, don't laugh at me. But we have a very strong vision group in the department, and when you think about some of the vision challenges that still have to be solved to get the rest of the way, right? There remains some big challenges. So, for example, an automobile recognizing automatically whether somebody on the side of the road is cognizant of the car, right? This person might not be. Another person who's looking straight at the car probably is. But this is, a notion that to reduce this kind of get to that zero traffic deaths number is somehow you're going to have to solve that. Another one is trying to figure out dynamic scenarios. Who's in control here? It's very unclear, right? Is the car seriously going to have to figure out, okay, first, is that dog leashed? And if it is, who's got more body mass or strength, right? Who's in control of this picture, right? In order to react to this coming along the side of the road. Another interesting challenge comes in the area of real time. Any safety critical system like this is going to have to not just act quickly, but act predictably quickly. And if you think about the scale, how we're getting faster in terms of our computing capabilities, it's largely happening today through multi-core platforms. Multi-core platforms are great. They give you parallelism and so forth, but unfortunately the cores also share resources. They share things like processor caches and buses. Consequently, if you're planning for the worst case, which if you're going to be predictably fast, you have to plan for the worst case. Every time a task is running on a core, it has to consider the possibility that all the other cores have evicted everything from its cache. Okay? And to plan for that worst case then, the best response we seem to have today is simply to turn off all but one core, because you don't have that interference now when you turn off all the other cores. It seems extreme, but if you're going to prove that your system will react quickly enough, that's what you have to do today. This seems to be a great challenge that looks to be 10 to 20 years out in terms of solving, just now after having picked the brains of our real-time experts in the department. Something, though, that's obviously fundamental to solving some of these safety-critical challenges. Now, just to wrap up, I mean, reflecting on all this, right, the success of the internet, the woes of security, the projected sort of positive direction, trajectory of the zero traffic deaths goal. The one takeaway from all these is that computing is innovating at really an incredible speed. And we're going to need to continue to advance that innovation at a comparable speed, especially for some of the existing challenges we continue to face. There are, of course, many, many more that I haven't been able to discuss. Things like new paradigms for computing, quantum computing I won't say is on the verge, but I was listening to a fascinating talk about it a couple of months ago, where the thing that stuck with me was that the speaker pointed out that within the quantum computing field, the mentality has shifted from the big surprise being that it would be possible to the big surprise being that it wouldn't be. So it's now expected to get there. And that's a scary prospect well, it's a great prospect from some point of view, and it's kind of scary from some others. But things like the democratization of power generation, the democratization of manufacturing through 3D printing, things like these are potentially transformative things that are coming down the pike, and that we're going to have to plan for and think about how to innovate through and to achieve maximum benefit from them. I don't know how many of them we're going to solve. What I can say is that I'm really privileged. I feel very privileged, honestly, to be part of this. And so I'm just, I hope we all try to do our part. That's what I'm going to try to do. And thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
So for the final event, we have our final talk of the evening, and it falls to me to introduce my fine colleague, Mike Reiter. Now, Mike is unique amongst the faculty because he is also an alum. So you could either hear me speaking as an alum or he's speaking as a faculty member. So as best I can tell, Mike showed up here on campus in 1985 as a kid from Asheville, North Carolina, but he tells me he was really a refugee from Texas. He received a BS in mathematical sciences with highest distinction, and as we've heard, that was a computer science degree, as it's done Mike well with computer science. Mike then went on to earn an MS and PhD in computer science from that place in New York that also has
he asked me where I wanted to go because I had come back and I said I want to go to the Rathskeller, and he said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he made me swear I would never tell anybody that he took me to the Rathskeller. I think I just blew that, Kevin. I'm sorry. So. Yeah. So thank you. It's a real privilege to be here, and I can't give you a retrospective like Steve and Fred can. In other words, I can't do it nearly as well as they can, so I'm not going to try. What I thought I would try to do is to use this opportunity to reflect.
I had lunch with Mike, and Mike showed up head to toe pretty much in Carolina blue. So I thought, Carnegie Mellon's not that bad of a school, but I thought, maybe we would have a chance. So we're delighted that Mike came and joined our faculty. So Mike is now the Lawrence M. Slifkin Distinguished Professor of Computer Science, and he leads a research group here in computer security. He's a fellow of the IEEE and the ACM, and an award-winning instructor here at UNC. So please welcome Mike to the podium.
So Kevin just reminded me with that lunch story.
The red robes, otherwise known as Cornell University. And Mike did not start out as an academic. Instead, he went the industrial research route, working at AT&T Labs and Bell Labs Lucent, where he eventually rose to the position of Director of Secure Systems Research. And then Mike eventually left industry and became a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. And in 2007, we were looking to try and grow the faculty, and we thought we would reach out and steal some folks. And Mike being an alum, we thought maybe, we could convince him to come down here. And I distinctly remember when Mike was visiting, we were trying to convince him.
On the last 50 years from our field's point of view, and try to project out a little bit into the future for the next 50 as to some of the grand challenges that we might face, that we are facing. And so sort of look backwards at something we've solved, look forward at something that's emerged, and frankly, I don't know what to do with it, and then something a little bit in between. And so with that, I want to start with the big success story, right? If you look back at the last 50 years and go, well, what has been our big successes, right? It's hard not to look at the internet and go, yeah, that's probably it. Now, this is a map of the internet in 1980. Of course, back then it was called the ARPANET. And it does